White text over video of past events. Logo, Cultural Access Collaborative. Professional Development Series presents. Where are you going? Where have you been? Accessibility self-assessment in your organization. At left, presentation slides. All content will be voiced. At right, stacked mini videos of presenting speaker and ASL interpreter.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate you joining us today. So thank you for joining us. This program will begin shortly. We ask that you keep your cameras off and mics muted throughout the entirety of this presentation. If you scroll over your image on Zoom, you should see three little dots pop up in the upper right corner. By clicking those and selecting Hide non-video participants, you will only see our presenters and ASL interpreters. You can put any questions you have throughout the presentation using the chat below. But please note our presenters will not be addressing questions until the Q&A portion at the end of this presentation. Thank you, and we'll begin right now. If you're interested, we suggest a $5 donation that helps support what the Cultural Access Collab does. We appreciate it, and it helps us complete our mission here. So, hello and welcome to Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been? Presented by Cultural Access Collaborative. My name is Bill Green. I am a steering committee member with I'm a steering committee member with the Cultural Collab. I'm a middle-aged white man with dark hair and beard. I'm wearing glasses and a blue shirt with a green fleece, and I'm sitting in my office where I work at Lincoln Park Zoo, and I use he, him pronouns. Accessibility is a priority for us, so our programs today include live captioning provided by Efficiency Reporting Services. Thank you to our providers, as well as ASL interpretation providers from Faith Interpreting, and thank you to those interpreters. If you'd like to view captions in a separate browser, you can do so using the stream text link included in the chat or by scanning the code on the slide. We encourage you to submit questions for our presentation using the chat function. If you have any questions or issues regarding accessibility, please reach out to our support team via the chat function as well. Thank you to the support team. In case you find that chat pop up bothersome, you can turn off show chat previews by clicking the caret next to the chat button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Okay, for those of you who are not familiar with Cultural Access Collab, our mission is to empower Illinois cultural spaces to become more accessible to visitors with disabilities. There are four primary pillars central to our work, and those include free professional development workshops, like the one you're at today, an accessibility equipment program, a loan program, an accessibility events calendar, and our growing statewide network. I'm very excited that you've joined us today for this program. We have two outstanding partners in Nicole Agois and Portia Brown from Open Door Arts, and I will pass it off to them. Thank you all.
Well, hello, everybody. My name is Nicole Agois. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a light-skinned Latina woman in my 40s, and I'm the managing director of Open Door Arts. We're going to do full, proper introductions in a minute with my colleague Portia, who is here as well. But just wanted to start by saying that we're very excited to have the opportunity to be here with all of you today, introducing the Arts and Culture Accessibility Self-Assessment Tool, which is a project of Open Door Arts. And also wanted to share gratitude to Bill, Glenn, Ruben, everyone from the Cultural Access Collaborative for this invitation, and then to all of you for being here. Also gratitude to our service providers today. And also just wanted to acknowledge that in the midst of all of the uncertainty that all of us might be feeling right now, and that our communities, in particular the disability community and the cultural community, are experiencing right now. This work is so important right now. And so just sharing profound gratitude to all of you for really prioritizing this right now. And we are hoping that the information and the resource that we're sharing with you today can help you really bring that work forward. So again, just immense gratitude. We are sharing a slideshow today, and on the screen right now is the logo of the Arts and Culture Accessibility Self-Assessment, which is made of a pentagon with each of the lines is a different color. And there's also some black and white images of different patrons and artists in a variety of cultural settings. At the bottom of the slide is the link to the self-assessment tool, which is www.artsaccessresources.org, and the link will also be dropped in the chat. Next slide, please. All right, so with that, we'll do some brief introductions both to Open Door Arts and to ourselves who are speaking today. So next slide. So Open Door Arts, if we are new to you, we are an affiliate of Seven Hills Foundation, and we are a Massachusetts-based arts and culture organization that works really uniquely at the intersection of disability, arts, and education. And our mission is to promote access, representation, and participation of people with disabilities in our arts and cultural community. At the bottom of the slide is our logo, which reads Open Door Arts, an affiliate of Seven Hills Foundation, in black and blue. Next slide, please. All right, so there's two of us who are speaking today representing this work, but we'll tell you a little bit more about the full team in a minute. So as I said, my name is Nicole Agois. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a musician, I'm an educator, disability advocate, and the managing director of Open Door Arts, where I have worked for 20 years, really supporting the sector, working with colleagues to do everything we can to make the arts and culture sector more accessible. And we've done that through education programs, we have a gallery, and also through our cultural inclusion and access programs. And with that, I'll pass it to Portia. And I appreciate also the link to Open Door Arts has also been dropped in the chat if you want to learn more about our work. I'll pass it to Portia.
Thanks, Nicole. Hi, everyone. I'm Portia Brown, also just echoing my gratitude for being here today. I use the she, her pronouns. I'm a white woman with long blonde hair. There are photos of Nicole and I on the slides as well, circular black and white photos where we're smiling in front of artwork. I'm the Director of Operations for Open Door Arts. I'm a certified ADA coordinator. Before that, I was a special education teacher and instructional coach. And before joining ODA about 7 years ago now, I oversaw all the community and access programs for Boston Ballet.
And we also wanted to, this is Nicole again, we also want to acknowledge kind of where Portia and I come into this work. And important to share that we both enter this work as non-disabled people, as non-disabled allies. We are both mothers of children who have disabilities and kind of navigate that side of the work. But also we are very mindful of the role that we do get to occupy in the sector and the role that we do not get to occupy in the sector. And we wanted to acknowledge that as we talk about this work. We really see our role as a convener, organizer, grant writer, operations people who make things happen. But the voices and the stories and the lived experience that inform the work come from disabled people. And we're going to introduce you to some of them in a minute. So with the next slide, please. These are the beautiful faces of some of the consultants and advisors who came together with us last year as we went through the process of creating the self-assessment tool. They informed the work at all stages, and Portia will tell you a little bit more about that in a minute, but they brought professional expertise, with the legal requirements, with experience working in arts and culture organizations, their own lived experience with a wide range of disabilities. Out of 14 consultants that we work with, at least 10 identify as disabled. There's 12 of them pictured here. There's some black and white images of 12 of those advisors. And we just want to really honor the work that they did to inform the creation of this tool at all stages. And we want to give a particular special shout out to Hannah Goodwin, who is pictured on the top, second from the left on the top row here. Hannah was cultural access specialist for Open Door Arts during the process of creating the self-assessment, and her work was enormously valuable in the creation of the tool. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Portia in the next slide, please, who is going to tell us a little bit more about the process.
Title: Why we created this tool.
This is Portia again. So we will be showing you thoroughly the self-assessment tool, how it looks, how to use it, how to access it. But a lot of thought and care went into the creation of it. And so we do think it's important to kind of share everything that led up to where we are today, having this tool to, share with the field and for the field to use. And this starts with why we created this tool. You can go to the next slide, please.
Title: Our experience and research showed a need.
So as Nicole mentioned, our organization has been around for 40 years, supporting cultural organizations and working with people with disabilities. And in that time, we heard a lot of the same questions, concerns, needs, and challenges when it came to making arts and culture spaces accessible. And we really wanted to understand if kind of our anecdotal evidence was truly reflective of the field more broadly. And so 3 years ago, in partnership with the Mass Cultural Council, we conducted some research to better understand the state of accessibility in the Massachusetts arts and culture sector. We conducted 2 studies, and those findings are published under a 2-part report titled Towards a Culture of Access. And if you can please drop that in the chat, that those reports, as well as screen reader friendly versions, are available to all of you through the link. So part 1 of Towards a Culture of Access examined the perspectives of cultural organizations. Part 2 examined the perspective of people with disabilities. This include artists with disabilities, cultural workers who identify as disabled, and caregivers of people with disabilities. And through these studies, we really found out a lot more about what is currently happening, what's working, what needs improvement, where the barriers are, and kind of what we think the needs were, right, to help improve access in our sector. So a couple findings that we want to highlight that really led to the creation of these tools. First, we found that organizations vary greatly in how they assess, understand, and actualize accessibility. We found from talking to people with disabilities that this variability creates harm, it creates fatigue, and it creates distrust. One really powerful statistic was that only 6% of people with disabilities said it was easy to request access services or accommodations when visiting an arts and culture organization. We also know that organizations want to be more accessible. We saw this so clearly across our research, but being accessible feels overwhelming. Organizations cited consistently that they didn't know where to begin. They didn't know how to take this huge idea of being accessible and get started, but they wanted to. And we saw on the flip side that people with disabilities are much more likely to visit arts and culture organizations if they saw that accessibility improve. So 72% of our respondents with disabilities said they would be more likely to visit arts and culture organizations if they were more accessible and they knew their access needs could be met. We also realized in examining a lot of the tools that existed and a lot of the tools that we ourselves were using to try to understand and improve our own accessibility, that the current tools felt incomplete. Some were maybe not disability centered enough. Some were too legal and not focused enough on kind of the human experience. Some were not focused for arts and culture organizations. And so we sort of found this gap. And with this information, it helped us prioritize the creation of a process as well as a lot of tools that we think can really help organizations better understand where they are, what they're doing well, where the needs are, and give them a clear plan and process to move forward and improve their accessibility. Next slide, please. So how we created this tool is what the next slide reads, and you can go to the next one, please. So creating this tool was a 2-year process. A lot of care and thought and collaboration went into it. The entire process was disability centered, which we not only really value, but also felt like sets this tool and this work apart from maybe some of the other things that were already out there. And that really starts with the entire impetus of this really came from the needs that we were hearing from our disability community, from our research, from patrons, from fellow cultural workers who identified as disabled. So that in and of itself kind of drove the entire creation. And then the entire process, as Nicole mentioned, was led by people with disabilities, including a huge team of advisors, full-time and part-time staff who not only helped with kind of the content, the questions, the structure, but also were really helpful in vetting the host platforms and vetting some of the technology access of the tools as well. And so then we had sort of user experts, that helped with all of that. There are some videos throughout as well that you'll see, and all of those have ASL interpretation as well as captioning. So after we had this tool created, we had a formal pilot with 13 organizations, a few of whom you will hear from today, which is great. Big shout out to Lincoln Park Zoo, who was an awesome pilot to help us better understand how this tool worked in real life with real organizations. We selected 13 organizations in all from across the country who represented a variety of sizes, types, budgets, as well as organizations that were in very different places in their accessibility work to sort of make sure that this tool could really work for everyone, no matter what type of org you were or where you were in your work. And interestingly enough, we had 127 organizations apply to be part of that process, which really also further indicated to us kind of the need from the field for something like this. So after we got all that feedback from our piloters, we made some revisions, made some adjustments, and then we publicly launched the tool on July 31st. Next slide, please. Right. This slide reads, the self-assessment is, next slide, please. And this is where we will finally start to get into this tool so you can get a better understanding of it and how possibly you can use it for your organization. So as I mentioned, this tool is specifically developed for arts and culture organizations. And the questions and the content all reflect that the users of this are individuals representing arts and culture organizations. And that includes of all sizes, of all budgets, of all types, all geographic locations, all settings, and then most importantly, at all stages of their accessibility work. So throughout this tool, you'll see, and we'll talk about a lot of scaffolding that's in place to help organizations be able to access and enter the tool no matter where you are, benefit from it, and move forward. So that includes organizations that are really far in their access work and organizations that are just getting started. Next slide, please. The tool, as I mentioned, is disability centered. It's informed by the needs and desires of people with disabilities. It's created by experts with lived and professional experience in disability. And then also the content of it incorporates disability history, culture, and justice as part of the questioning, as part of the foundation of the content. And then it also similarly balances kind of humanity and the perspective of people with those legal compliance items that we know are so important and really so at the forefront often of what we think about when we start into our access work. Next slide, please. The self-assessment is very comprehensive. There are 300 questions total, and those cover 5 sections of accessibility, including organizational approach, space, access services, communication, and programming. So this really is a 360-degree assessment of your accessibility. But don't worry, it is fully digital, it is self-paced, you can take it slowly, you can take it in parts. We created this for ourselves and our colleagues, so it is not meant to be overwhelming. It should be comprehensive, but still enjoyable. And then at the end of the assessment too, you receive a customized report that will highlight strengths and areas of growth so that beyond just taking the self-assessment, you'll get a very comprehensive understanding of where you are. Next slide, please. The self-assessment is also filled with resources to help the learning process along the way. We found as we were creating this that in order to access it, there were some gaps that we needed to fill and some additional tools and supplemental features that we needed to create to make sure that everyone could, have an inroad to this assessment. So we have an accessibility glossary. It's over 100 definitions at this point. Again, we learned very quickly that if there's not a common understanding of language or what terms mean, it's really hard to answer questions that include those terms. There's also a 504 ADA requirement ID tool, and Nicole will talk about this a little bit later on. There are accessibility plan templates, there are guides, there are links to additional resources, and then we also host Q&A sessions and one-to-one coaching. So there should be a lot of support throughout your process to answer any questions and help scaffold that learning. Next slide, please. Most importantly, I always say we should start with this slide. Everything is free. The tool is free. All of the resources are free. It was critical to us that there not be any barriers for accessing this tool. And we know that, oftentimes a full audit and other assessments can be really cost prohibitive and really time prohibitive. So we tried to make something that is free to access and easy to use, and we hope in doing so, it means that organizations can really seamlessly and easily get started on improving their accessibility work. And with that, Nicole is going to give you a tour of the tool.
Title: Self-Assessment Tour.
All right, this is Nicole. Thank you, Portia. This is the time you have all been waiting for, where you get to see what this all looks like. I know there have been some links in the chat, including the link to the self-assessment and some of the supplemental tools. And so I will walk you through what these look like. And you can, again, open them and look at them in your own computer as well. So I'm going to share my screen.
A Google document titled Arts and Culture Accessibility Glossary. All links visited are listed in the description below.
And if somebody can give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen. Great. All right, wonderful. So I'm going to start with some of the supplemental tools that Portia mentioned before we get into the self-assessment. The first tool, which you can see on the screen right now, is the accessibility glossary. As Portia said, this is a glossary of access-related terms that we have brief definitions for. It is organized in alphabetical order, so and if you open the outline on the left side, you can navigate from one term to the other. You will see a brief, 2 to 3 sentence definition of the term, and also some additional links so that you can learn further. So our hope, again, with the glossary is that if at some point in the process of taking the self-assessment, there are any terms that you're unfamiliar with, you can learn what they are and learn more information so that you don't have to pause your process and you can just learn as you go. The glossary is accessible both as a standalone document, but also it is linked within the self-assessment. And when we get into the self-assessment, I will show you what that looks like. The other document that Portia mentioned as a resource that we created is this tool, which we call the ADA/504 ID tool, also known as a legal identification tool. The reason we created this tool is because we were hearing from organizations that it was really hard to know in the process of assessing whether they were in compliance with the law, because they weren't sure which laws apply to them or which parts of which laws, or in which ways. So for example, characteristics that may vary organization to organization, like for example, whether you receive federal funds, whether you are open to the public, whether you're, Title II or Title III organization as under the ADA, vary and also impact how those laws apply to your organization. So we wanted to be as clear as possible upfront as you got started with this process, with a simple tool that will help you better understand that. So this tool is a simple questionnaire, very straightforward, yes and no answers. And so as you go along, you will answer yes or no. So as an example, question 2 is your organization a non-government organization that is open to the public? This includes theaters, shops, galleries, parks, recreational facilities, etc. This is probably the case for most organizations who are going to be taking the self-assessment. So in that case, you would answer yes. There are other questions that would relate to exemptions. For example, do you own the spaces where your organization operates, or do you lease? Do you receive federal funds? When was your building last altered, etc.? Once you answer these 13 questions, you would hit finish at the bottom here, and it will trigger a report. And the report will basically take all of the questions that you answered yes to, and then based on that question, give you information. So for example, if you had answered yes to that question 2, which I read earlier, it would tell you, you answered yes to this question, which means you fall under Title III of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which means here are 10 things at a glance that you should know about what Title III requires, and then we'll give you links and resources so that you can learn more. So again, our hope is that when you take this tool and you have a better understanding of how legal requirements apply specifically to your organization, once you take the self-assessment, you'll be in a better place to understand how the self-assessment questions apply to you, the ones that are legally that have legal specifications. Great. So with that, I'm going to go into the self-assessment. To get into the self-assessment, you would go to the link we shared earlier in the chat. Maybe we can put it back in the chat, which is artsaccessresources.org. And that takes you into this landing page with a little description. You will see 3 boxes. The one on the left takes you straight into the self-assessment. And then, as Portia mentioned, we offer support sessions. So we can do one-on-one support sessions just with your organization to answer your questions or support you through the process. We have some organizations who will book a series of support sessions so that we can support them throughout the process. Of many different ways you can do this. Or if you just have a couple of quick questions, you can come to one of our monthly drop-in sessions, which you can book on the using the link to the right. So you would click Get Access here on the left side where it says Self-Assessment, and that takes you into the self-assessment. The self-assessment is hosted through a platform called Brilliant Assessments, which again, we vetted for accessibility with a lot of user experts. And when you first land on this page, the first thing that you will see here at the top is a self-assessment guide. And I cannot emphasize enough how much we recommend that you start by reading that self-assessment guide. It will take you 5 minutes and it will save you a lot of time later on. It will really help you to structure your process, prepare your team, prepare yourself for whatever process you choose and is appropriate for your organization. So really highly recommend that you start by reading that guide. And then you will, below that, you will see a box where you will enter your email address. I want to clarify that at no point during the self-assessment, we will ask you for your organization's name. And this is our commitment to respect your privacy. This is not an assessment process. This is a self-assessment process. So this is for you and only for you to learn, for you to assess, for you to grow. So we will not know who the response belongs to. The only thing that will connect you to a response is this email address. You could use a personal email address if you prefer not to use an organization-specific email address. But please remember what email address you use, because you will use that email address to come into the self-assessment. So once you enter your email address and you hit next, you will enter the self-assessment And also, you will receive an email with a unique link. And that unique link is the link that you can use over and over to come in and out of your self-assessment. And your progress will be saved, and you can access it again using that link. So you will hit next after you put your email address here. And that brings you right into the content. So there's a brief introduction. I'm going to point out a couple of features. At the very top of all of the pages, you will see a progress bar. That'll give you an idea of how far along you are in your progress. There is, to the right of that, at the top right-hand corner, there is a button that says Save Progress. You can save your progress as you go along, but your progress should be saved automatically as well. It's always a good idea to hit that button if you're coming out and you're leaving the page. You might as well hit the Save Progress button just to be safe, but it should be saved automatically. At the top of every section, you will also see right below the progress bar a hyperlink that has a downloadable PDF of the content of that page. If this is a more accessible way for you to access this information, or if you want to download it so that you can share it with other people or save it on your computer, by all means, you can do that. And then you will have a written introduction telling you more about the self-assessment process. And then there is a video at the bottom, which has all of that information said verbally, and also with ASL interpretation provided by a deaf interpreter, and also with captioning. So again, you have multiple representations of the information. Once you read the introduction, you're going to hit next at the bottom right-hand corner. And now we're in the main self-assessment where the content and the questions come. As Portia mentioned earlier, the self-assessment is broken into 5 main sections: organizational approach, space, access services, communication, and programming. And they are color-coded using the 5 colors of our logo. So the first section, organizational approach, is blue. And you will see later on when I show you the report where the colors kind of help with some of this organization. For this section, again, you will have a downloadable PDF. You'll have some written introduction, which is really helpful to read before you get started, to get you settled on what this section is about and give you more information. There are also resources and links for this section. So for example, the organizational approach section covers employment. So here we give you Title I information for the ADA. We give you information about what transition plans are, et cetera. And you may have just noticed this is how the glossary is linked within the self-assessment. So I showed you the glossary document earlier, but as you take the self-assessment, there will be words that are hyperlinked and in blue. If you hover over them, that means that those words have a glossary definition. So for example, the word transition plans has a glossary definition. If you hover over it with your mouse, you will see a definition pop up, which is accessible to some of us. But if you use a screen reader or if this text is too small, you can just click on it and it'll take you to the self-assessment. So that will be a more accessible way, again, if you use a screen reader, for example. So different ways for you to access the glossary as you're going through the process. Great. Then you see, again, the video with ASL and captions with the same, all of that information. And here's where we get into the good stuff, which is the questions. So each of the 5 sections is further divided into more specific subsections. So for example, organizational approach starts with values, beliefs, and mindset. That is one of the subsections. And under this section, you will see a number of questions. All of the questions have the same response choices throughout the entire self-assessment for consistency. And the response choices are fully true, mostly true, somewhat true, not true. And then you also have not sure or not applicable. So we really encourage you to think hard about the questions that you answer not sure and not applicable to. Sometimes it is easy to think that something is not applicable because we're not currently doing it or because it doesn't seem feasible now, but it doesn't mean that it's not something we should do. So in that case, maybe not true right now is the right answer. And not true doesn't mean that you're not committed and that you won't do it one day. So this is, again, it's a process for you, for your organization, to be really mindful about how are things actually going right now so that we can identify what needs to be improved. So again, think about whether the answer is really not applicable or whether it's just not true yet. Again, you can see within the questions themselves some of those glossary terms as well, so you can learn as you go. And then another feature that I want to point out, and I'm going to scroll really quick. Okay, so now we're in the subsection called Employment of People with Disabilities. So question 8 is, people with disabilities have equitable opportunities to participate, work for, and engage with our organization. And at the end of that question, there is an asterisk. The asterisks are used throughout the self-assessment to indicate that a question has an associated legal requirement. So here we have legal requirements around Title I of the ADA, for example, that are related to this statement, this question. If you have taken the identification tool that I showed you earlier, you will have understood whether Title I requirements apply to your organization or not, depending on your organization size. So again, it's important to better understand what your requirements are before you answer the self-assessment, so that even if you see an asterisk, you can have a better understanding of whether that applies to your organization or not. And even if your organization is not legally required, that's probably also a really good practice for you to think about anyway. But that's what the asterisks mean. So with that, I'm going to scroll very quickly to the bottom of the organizational approach section to show you another feature. So at the very bottom of all of these 5 sections, you will see a text box. And within this text box, that's entirely for you to take notes. So as you're answering each of those 5 sections, you can take some notes to share with your team or to remind yourself of some of the reasons why you answered a certain way, or things that you want to keep in mind as you move forward. You can write all of those here, and those will be saved for you at the end when you get your report, and I will show you what that looks like. So with that, we're gonna move on from organizational approach to the space section very quickly. So you would hit next at the bottom right-hand corner. Now we're in the space section. You can see that the progress bar on top, you're moving further along. So with this same drill, you have that PDF, the introduction, and then we get to the resources and links for this section. And I want to point out another resource that we are using here that is specific to the space section, which is a companion resource. And the reason why we have this here is because, as you can, I'm sure, empathize and identify with this, space can be complex. There's a lot of legal requirements and technical standards relating to physical space. So we wanted to help you out a little bit as you go through the process of evaluating your physical spaces by giving you an easier way to connect the questions in our self-assessment to some of the ADA standards for existing facilities. So we have hyperlinked here in the resources section this tool called the ADA checklist for existing facilities, which was developed by our colleagues at the New England ADA Center here based here in Massachusetts. And I will show you in a minute how we connect our self-assessment to that tool to help you out. The full 2010 ADA standards are also available here to support you. Again, here's our video, and then we get into the questions. So I'm going to scroll quickly to question 11, which is the first time that we link the questions to this resource that I mentioned, the ADA checklist for existing facilities. So question 11, you will see that in addition to the asterisks at the end, which shows that there is a legal requirement, there is a set of numbers in parentheses. And these numbers correspond to the section of the ADA checklist for existing facilities. I'll show you what that looks like. So the numbers here are 1.13 through 1.36, for example. This is about exterior routes to your entrances. So if you go to the ADA checklist, now I have it open. This is the section of the ADA checklist that starts on 1.13, and it is about exterior accessible route. So as you are answering the questions in the self-assessment, you can look here so that it can help you understand what are the requirements and are we in compliance. So this question says, exterior routes to our entrances meet ADA requirements for dimensions, slope, curb ramps, and surface. So you might be wondering, what are the ADA requirements? Well, then you go to the checklist and the checklist will tell you. The route is at least 36 inches wide. It's stable, firm, and slip resistant, etc. So that'll tell you what the requirements are, and it'll help you be able to answer these questions for your organization. Great. So I won't walk you through all of the sections, but space covers a number of different types of facilities as well as different types of spaces. So with that, I will scroll down, and then when you're done with the space section, you go to the next section, which is access services. I won't go into detail because they're all follow the same structure, but access services include things like sign language interpretation and captioning and audio description and sensory services. So that's what's in here. The fourth section is communication, and this covers things like your website and social media, digital and print materials, the way you communicate the services and the features, accessibility features of your organization, etc. And lastly is the programming section, which is the shortest section of the self-assessment. And the reason is because when we're thinking about providing accessible programming, we're also thinking about the other 4 sections, right? What space is that programming taking place in? What are our policies? What services are we providing? How are we communicating? All of those things are already things that we have considered in other parts of the self-assessment. So this section is a little bit more concise. And when you're done with the last section, which is programming, you would go to the very end, which is our closing. And the closing just asks you some very brief demographic questions. The reason we ask these questions, as I mentioned earlier, we do not ask you for your organization's name, so your answers are private and only available to you. But we do ask some demographic information because we hope to take all of the information we collect in the self-assessment and aggregate all of that data to help share data back with the sector so that we can all kind of hold ourselves collectively accountable and continue to identify opportunities and resources to move this work forward. So we hope to take, again, aggregate data without names and without any identifiers to move that research forward. So we'll ask you questions around what type of organization you are, if there's a secondary type, your staff size, your operating budget, what state you're located in, and we ask you whether you, if you authorize us to include your anonymous responses in an aggregate data set. And again, if you say no, we will not include them. When you're done, and we put this in very large print to make sure that you don't accidentally click finish. And if you do, don't worry, we have your back. But try to make sure that you are really finished with all the sections and before you hit finish at the end at the bottom right. Because once you hit finish, what will happen is a report will be triggered automatically. It'll take about a minute to appear on your screen. And you also will receive an email with a link with a report, and it'll be available both as a Word document and as a PDF. And I'm going to show you what that report looks like so you get an idea. So the report, again, is automatically triggered, and what it does is it gives you, it takes all of your responses and it shares them back with you in the form of a score. You're going to have different levels of scores. The first score is going to be an overall score for your entire self-assessment. So this is taking an average of all of your responses. If you have selected NA or Ensure, those responses will not be averaged, will not be counted. So just want to be clear about that. If you skip a question, also those responses will not be averaged or added. It will just not count at all. So you will get one overall score for your entire self-assessment for your whole organization. And then you will get section summary scores. So these are individual scores for each of those 5 sections. This is where the color coding helps. So you will see a number, and this is where you start to see, we scored much higher in the programming section here at 91% than we did in the access services section where we scored a 74. So you start to see kind of some trends and it starts to give you some idea of where you might need to pay more attention. But where the fun part comes is we break that apart even further. And so, as I mentioned earlier, each of those 5 sections have subsections. And so you also get scores for each of those subsections. So here, for example, in the organizational approach section, you can see that in accountability, this organization scored 63%, whereas in finance and budgeting, they scored 100%. So again, you start to see some trends. In grievance, they only scored 33. So that's where you start to see which sections might need more attention. And I'm going to scroll quickly, but just wanted to show you that you get scores for all of your sections. If there isn't a score, it means that you didn't answer those questions. So for example, if an organization doesn't have an elevator and you skip the elevators question, you will not get a score because you don't have an elevator. So it's not applicable to you. And again, those scores are not averaged with your overall score. They just won't count if you skip them. Great, so then I'm going to skip forward and show you, before I show you the accessibility plan, I'm going to scroll to the very, very end of the report where you get a recap of all of your responses. So every single question for all of the sections, you will see what you answered. If you answered mostly true, fully true, etc. And then, as I mentioned earlier, if you added any comments into those text box at the end, those will be captured in this section as well. So again, all of your responses are there for your reference. Pardon my rapid scrolling. So I'm going to go back to where we were before, which is the part where the magic really happens. And this is the part where you take everything you learned and you put it into practice. And this is the process of creating an accessibility plan. And we're going to help you out with that process by giving you some guidance. What is an accessibility plan? How might you go about creating one? So we give you some steps that are suggested. Every organization is different. The way it might look for one or another might be very different, but we give you some ideas around how you might identify what needs to be improved, how you might prioritize those items into a plan, and also the process of creating a timeline, determining roles and responsibilities, determining costs, etc. And and also accountability and follow-up, which are so important. But more importantly, we're going to give you a couple of templates for accessibility plans, which you could use. You could create your own. You could modify them. Whatever works for you is great. We have one in Excel or Google Sheet format, and another one as a Word or Google Doc format. And then we also share some examples of transition plans, which are essentially the same thing provided by ADA centers. So you have multiple options there. I'm going to show you what our Excel or Google Sheet format accessibility plan looks like. So this is an example, and we have provided you on line 3 here an example of how you might do this. So the first section is what category out of those 5 sections. So in this case, the example is under organizational approach. What is the item? In the example, it's hiring materials. And then you say, what is the issue with that item? What do we need to improve? So you say, our hiring materials are missing accessibility information. So what is your plan for improvement? We need to add certain things, right? A salary, inclusion statement, etc. What is your plan completion date? So this is where you start strategizing and planning. Who is responsible, person or team? Is there an approximate cost? And not everything will have a cost, right? Many accessibility improvements are free or are involved within existing jobs and responsibilities. If there is a cost, what is your funding source? And also you can decide whether it's low, medium, or high priority level. And you can also start to track the progress for your plan, whether it's in progress, not started, or completed. And you have space where you can add notes. And again, you can customize this as you wish to make it work for you. And but we hope that these templates are helpful as you move forward with taking everything that you've learned through the process of self-assessing and all of that reflection and putting it into practice and actually making things happen. And we also always want to give a reminder that this is not a 1-year plan. Usually this is an ongoing process, and you can identify, short-term, medium-term, very long-term priorities, and kind of continue to hold yourself accountable. And this is a process that also we should be doing on a regular basis. The law requires 3 years if you receive federal funds, but as often as is needed by your organization, or whenever you make changes or modifications, is a good time to do a new self-assessment and transition plan or accessibility plan. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we are really thrilled to have with us two folks from organizations that have used the self-assessment, Bill Green and Saralyn Klepaczyk, who are going to introduce themselves and their organizations and tell us a little bit more about their process. So thank you so much, Bill and Saralyn.
Title: From the Field.
Great. This is Bill Green again. Thank you both, Portia and Nicole, so much. That was excellent. And I'm here. If you're already not convinced that this is the perfect tool for your organization, I'm here to hopefully convince you further. So I work as the Accessibility Inclusion Manager at Lincoln Park Zoo, and we're one of the pilot sites. And I just want to talk a little bit about expectations for when you're taking this, how it works at your organization. Just to give you some background for Lincoln Park Zoo, if you're not familiar, we're a free admission zoo in Chicago. We welcome over 3 million guests a year, and we're open 365 days a year. And as a zoo, we wear a lot of different hats. Not only are we an accredited zoo, but we're also an accredited arboretum and an accredited botanic garden. We have over 30 scientists on site in our conservation science center. We are also the destination for weddings, birthdays, and lots of other special occasions that people want to come and celebrate here. And we do this over 21 buildings and 49 acres. So if that sounds like your organization, or you're doing any of those things, or you're an organization that also wears many hats, I want you to know that this self-assessment tool really covers all of those areas and covers so many of the day-to-day operations, the continuous things, the things that happen occasionally, and those even kind of one-time events that happen. What I also really enjoyed about this is the chance, as we were doing this, I was kind of the central hub, the person who organized doing the self-assessment. I was the only person who went and inputted information into the self-assessment, but it took me reaching out and working with a lot of other folks and a lot of other departments at the zoo to be able to answer all the questions. It's a great opportunity, and it was a time to really ask people questions about accessibility that they had not thought of before. Even if they had taken some accessibility training, they had some familiarity with accessibility, I was able to bring them things that directly related to their operations and areas that they were over. So some of the departments I worked with was our animal keepers, our facilities maintenance, engineering folks, the people in our science and conservation folks, development, education, our marketing and communication, our guest services folks. But also we have third party on grounds also, and was able to reach with our food services, our catering, our event rental, our security, and even our gift shop that are all managed by third party. And it also got them involved in answering questions. It's a very comprehensive, because it brings in all those people, and there's not going to be one person at your organization that can answer all these questions. If you've been looking for a way to put this on people's radar, to put accessibility on somebody's radar, to get buy-in, somebody might have a ready answer for you. For example, one of the questions is asking how often are the maintenance or routine checks done on your elevators, things like that. That's a nice something to bring up and show your maintenance staff that you're already doing something toward accessibility. But also there's other questions on there about, like, do you have plans for evacuation for staff or for guests who identify as disabled? And that might be something you bring to your security, your safety committees, and so on, that they've not thought specifically about, but it really will resonate with what they're doing. So We have since been able to use this, but I'm going to pass that off. But I just wanted to let folks know if you thought this tool was appropriate for your organization. I think it has a really wide appeal, and it's amazing the scope that it can cover. And you will definitely find something and learn something new about your organization by completing the tool. So I will pass it off to Saralyn. Thank you all.
Hi everyone, my name is Saralyn. My pronouns are she, they, and I am a young person with shoulder length brown hair. I'm wearing a black blouse and brown glasses and dark green headphones. I am from the Celebrity Series of Boston, which is a multidisciplinary nonprofit performing arts presenter. We do over 100 concerts a year. Some are paid, some are free, and we work with over 20 venues in the greater Boston area. I am the assistant manager of audience services, so I work in the box office and the marketing team. And one small slice of my job is being the designated accessibility coordinator for our organization, which has around 40 employees that are either full-time or part-time, and then we have several contracted employees as well. So I have been chairing our accessibility staff committee since July, and we've really been functioning as mostly doing data collection for this self-assessment. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about how I've approached this, because it can be kind of intimidating, and there's also several layers of leadership above me that are going to make the decisions on what we do with this information. So I'm going to talk about parts 1, 3, 4, and 5. We're going to skip space for a second, and I'll come back to how we're doing that. But so how I went about completing this, and we haven't submitted it yet. It's one of our grant deliverables to complete it by June 2025, but we're gonna get it done by then. So I actually ended up putting the self-assessment in a spreadsheet that could be shared with other coworkers, and we did a 4-step process of review of the content. So I know some people sit down and fill it out all together all at once, but this is what's worked for us. So I filled out all of the sections to the best of my knowledge. I do a lot of cross-departmental work, so I could answer most of the questions. And then I sent the sections to relevant members of our accessibility committee who work in the departments that relate to the section. So for our organizational approach, I sent this to our associate director of finance and admin, who's on the accessibility committee. And for communications, I sent it to our director of communications. So they looked at that, they made their edits. I met briefly with them to reconcile any edits. And then we did another round of review on these parts and these answers with 2 staff members who looked at all of the parts and who are not on the accessibility committee. So we did that, we reconciled that. And then at our most recent accessibility committee meeting, there were like a few questions that needed some group discussion. So we discussed those. And now our parts 1, 3, 4, and 5 are ready to submit. So that's how we went about approaching it for that. For space, we do not own our own venue. And this is possibly a niche thing. So I'll only talk a little bit about it. But if you have more questions, if this applies to your organization, I'm happy to speak more to it. So we don't own our own venue, but we work with many venues. So we are still in the process of filling out part 2. We're filling it out once for our office space, which we lease. And then we're not filling it out for all 20 of our venues before the end of this June. I would die. But we are doing kind of a sampling of venues that represent kind of like the major types of venues that we work with. And so we're filling out the second part 5 more times, just the second part multiple times for those other venues. So we're working with those third-party folks to get that information. And then we are also working with other organizations who are filling out the self-assessment, who are our venue partners, and getting that data from them as well. And then once we get the results back, I'm going to meet with our executive director to get more clarity on who's setting the strategy and priority and executing. And that's our plan. It's been a great experience filling the self-assessment out. Nicole and Portia have been so helpful. They've answered any question I've ever had. They're super responsive. And this is such a thorough look at every single aspect. I think a lot of times in my role in my organization, I get, well, we just work different. It's just different for us. And this self-assessment does a really great job capturing every single scenario you could possibly think of, and really does such a wonderful job balancing the like best practices and legal requirements. So Thank you to Nicole and Portia for inviting me to be here today. And if anyone has any questions about anything I've chatted about, feel free to give me a shout.
Title: Q&A. The panelists appear in a grid as they first speak.
Thank you so much, Saralyn. Thank you, Bill. This is Ruben. I'm a steering committee member of the Cultural Access Collab. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a Hispanic male in his early 30s with short black hair and a short beard. I'm wearing a long-sleeved black sweatshirt. And now we want to hear from you, our viewers, our audience, with questions for our presenters. For the live Q&A, we'll spend the next 10 or so minutes going through some of those questions. So please feel free to continue putting your questions into the chat. I'm going to pull up some of the questions that we've received already. I think this is an easy question for Nicole and Portia. So the first question I have here is, progress can be saved automatically during the self-assessment tool, right?
They nod yes.
So I suspect that the reason why someone might want to ask a question like that is because, as Bill and Saralyn have spoken about, you might want to complete the tool over a long period of time. And so one of the questions that was asked was, is there an average length of time? Do you have that kind of data from organizations as to how long it's taken them to complete the tool?
We do. This is Portia speaking. So we do. The average time for our pilot orgs and then kind of our first round of organizations that started using this tool was 2.5 hours. I can tell you that the entire range from our piloters was 1 hour was the shortest amount of time. 7 hours was the longest amount of time to complete the whole process. And that really speaks to, as you started to kind of hear from Bill and Saralyn, the different approaches that organizations take when completing their self-assessment. And there's no right or wrong way. It's just whatever is right for your organization. It also, that average time and time range has a lot to do, we found, with size. So our 1 hour, and I think it was actually 45 minutes, respondent was an organization that has 1.5 staff. And so the person that completed it is the one full-time person who is the executive director, and she knows the inner workings of all 5 of those areas because it's just her. So she could very quickly and easily respond to the questions. Our longest time was an organization that they decided to have kind of representation from each department, and they decided to go through every question together as a team and engage in discussion along the way. They also engaged in collaborative learning along the way. So as a team, if they came to a question and somebody sort of wasn't sure about what it meant, they would dive in together, right? Going into those resources, going into the glossary, and learned along the way. And so that's where that 7 hours came in. I think the approach that Saralyn described is what we have, I would say, most commonly seen, that kind of gets you at about that midpoint where there's sort of a point person. They help organize the strategic person or persons from the relevant departments. Those relevant people kind of go and do their section. And then there's a moment or a way in which they come back together. Sometimes the individual people input their section on their own using the shared link. Other times they come back together. Other times a point person enters it. But that's been, I think, the most common style and where we get around that 2 to 3 hour mark for completion.
Wonderful. Thank you, Portia. I think that kind of ties into another question that we have here as to, are there any recommendations as to how an organization would build the team to help complete this tool? I know that Saralyn and Bill have spoken a little bit as to the folks that they got involved into completing the tool. Yeah, are there any recommendations, things that you learned, Saralyn and Bill, about who you involved into the conversations around using the tool?
Sure, this is Bill.
Yeah.
I can answer that real quick. That I like I mentioned, I reached out to a lot of different departments when doing this, and it was really a lot of like managers and directors in those departments, people who, and since so many questions are related to things that are part of policies and systems that exist, being able to work with people who actually build those systems and policies, I think was really beneficial, that they have some locus of control when you're asking about accessibility and what changes we can make. So trying to get those change makers involved.
Wonderful. We do have another question about the flexibility of the tool. I know that Bill and Saralyn are representative of two very different organizations. Does the survey apply to virtual organizations that primarily work virtually? Is that something that the tool can kind of speak to?
Yeah, this is Nicole. Absolutely. I would say, so, taking out the spaces section, the first section is going to cover employment, policies, procedures, culture, all of that. So absolutely applicable. The services section absolutely applies to virtual programming, communications absolutely applies, and then programming also. So I would say, with the exception of physical spaces, the entire self-assessment applies to virtual organizations. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Nicole. This is Ruben again. We have a question for Saralyn, actually. The question is, with so many venues, how did you determine which 5 you would use for your sample size?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we decided on, it's going to get a little nitty gritty, but you can ask clarifying questions. So we picked 5. We picked 2 venues that generally host events for our free neighborhood arts concert series. We picked one that's in Cambridge and one that is right across the street from our office place, primarily because those building contacts are the most responsive. So we're hoping to have the best odds of getting information from them. And then for the 3 venues where we do paid performances, we picked one where we own all of the box office and front of house and everything, and all those access services. We picked one where we share like ticket sales, we consign part of our inventory to them, then they're not a school. And then we picked one that is a school. So we just kind of looked at like the wide variety of factors that each venue has to deal with and picked like a little sample of each.
This is Nicole. Ruben, if I might just add something really quick that Saralyn has alluded to, that it might be in the minds of some folks in the room, on the Zoom, which is that you can take the self-assessment as many times as you want. And as Saralyn said, they took all of the other sections once, and then they're taking the space section multiple times. The way you would do that is you go to the beginning, and where you put your email address, you would just start from the beginning and put a different email address. So you do need a unique email address for each self-assessment that you submit, but each of the self-assessments that you submit could only focus on one section. So again, you can take the space section 5 times using 5 different email addresses. Just make sure you remember which one is for which. But that way, again, if you have, for example, different programs that are very different from one another, and you want to assess your programs with 2 different forms, you can submit that section multiple times.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Saralyn. If I can follow up to that question. So Saralyn, you put in this information about these various venues, these various spaces that your organization works with. What do you do when you get this information back from this tool when you don't have ownership over these spaces? Do you share this information with those organizations?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we haven't quite gotten to that part of the process yet, but the plan is to share that information with the organizations and to kind of see with all of the venues that we currently have partnerships with where we are at, and are there venues where we want to reevaluate our relationship if they're able to make certain accommodations or not, what sort of things we want to keep an eye on for new venues. We also, Boston is a very old city. Some venues are not going anywhere and they're not changing. And then sometimes new venues are being built all the time. And so it just helps. My hope is that it will help us in the season planning process moving forward. But you are correct. We can't go to a venue and be like, this report says this, you need to change it. There's only so much we can do.
Got it. Thank you, Saralyn. And I think we have time for just one more question. So the question relates to employment. So when using the self-assessment tool, does it ask questions that cover contractual contractors in lieu of employees? Is that something that the tool covers as well?
This is Nicole. Yeah. So the employment section. So there's a couple of things. One is what are things that are legally required by Title I of the ADA, and also does Title I of the ADA apply to your organization depending on your staff size, right? You need to have 15 or more employees. So there's the legal stuff, and then there's the best practice stuff. And the self-assessment is really written to be comprehensive, and we're talking about your interns and your volunteers and your contract staff. And so it'll walk you through what your legal requirements are, but it'll also really put in, best practices for absolutely anyone who works for you, whether you pay them or not, and whether they have whether they're staff or a contractor or an employee.
The panelists leave.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nicole. Okay, well, I'm really excited to jump into this tool myself. I haven't had the pleasure of using it, but it all sounds very, very exciting and very helpful. I want to thank all of the viewers, the audience, for joining us. We would like to take this opportunity to announce that applications to join our 25-27 Cultural Access Collab Steering Committee are now open. You can find the link in the chat or on our website to learn more and apply. There will also be 2 open houses on Zoom to learn more about what joining entails. One of those will be held on April 8th at 4 p.m. Central Time, and one on May 6th at 12 p.m. Central Time. Next slide, please.
QR code bottom left.
You can also use the QR code on screen if you would like to donate. Your support allows us to continue our efforts to expand accessibility support and learning events across Illinois. You can also please fill out the brief survey posted in the chat and sent to you via email following the event. And at this time, we will be bringing today's program to a close. I want to again thank all of our presenters, Nicole, Portia, Saralyn, Bill. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, your insights with us today. I want to thank our accessibility service providers and the Collab production team, and mostly thank you all for supporting the Cultural Access Collaborative. And at this time, the session has concluded, so you can please exit the Zoom meeting and take care. Thank you so much, everyone.
Credits appear. Where are you going? Where have you been? Accessibility self-assessment in your organization. Presented by Cultural Access Collaborative. For workshop resources and more information, visit culturalaccesscollab.org. Presenting speakers: Ruben Carazana, CAC, Moderator; Portia Brown, Director of Operations, Open Door Arts; Nicole Agois, Managing Director, Open Door Arts; Bill Green, Hart Prins Fund Manager of Accessibility and Inclusion, Lincoln Park Zoo; Saralyn Klepaczyk, Assistant Manager of Audience Services, Celebrity Series of Boston. Workshop Accessibility, Efficiency Reporting, Real-Time Captioning, Faith Interpreting, ASL Interpretation, Video Editing, Captioning, and Audio Description by BridgetMelton.com.